this is how the tower wants you to see it. And I hate to disappoint you, but
it's not doing anything. Wow.
And that's the review done. Another successful YouTube fake out ending. Here's my fake call out for you to subscribe, a fake Patreon plug, and fake thumbnails superimposed onto the image. You can try and click on them, but they won't work because it's not the end of the video. The first question that comes to mind is why? Why does this exist? Is it fun? Do people actually want it? And most importantly, what the hell is it? Well, it's the Dark Tower, reimagined for a modern audience. And if you're old and American enough, you'll know exactly what it is. And if like me you're not, then let's face it, this looks tacky as
ships.
But I bet you're still curious, so let's talk about Return to Dark Tower, who, amongst its many designers, lists Isaac Childress, who also owns a board game publishing company that paid us money to design a scenario for a game called Frosthaven. So take what I say with a lick of salt, whether you're a horse or not. To begin our journey, I have to take you back to a faraway mystical land called the 80s, where the Dark Tower comes from. And I'm not going to waste your time with toys were different back then, we did not have Minecraft or whatever, but I do want to contextualize things just a teensy bit. Dark Tower came out in 1981, and this was before most of the popular plastic. Comparatively, Transformers came out in 1984, that's 3 years later. And also, fantasy games were still pretty new. D&D was just starting to climb out of the basement into public consciousness. Warlock of Firetop Mountain hasn't even been published yet. Hero Quest came out in 1989. That's nearly a decade apart. When it came to brave heroes going on an adventure against unspeakable evil, this was one of the only options, and it came in hulking black marble and with a mind of its own. The tower clicked and hissed and moved and schemed against you. It had ill intent. It did not care for you. It was an adversary. It was imagination. Here's the problem. In 2022, you just can't have that. In Return to Dark Tower, 1 to 4 players will take on the role of fantasy archetypes like not Conan, or not Corvo, or not the Gunslinger, or the uncomfortable realization that there isn't a familiar trope for the female character because fantasy hasn't done them justice, and set off on a quest. Each time you play, you'll pick said quest and also an adversary. Maybe this time the not Nazgul from famous intellectual property Elden Rings is trying to get into the tower to, I don't know, make more Nazgul eggs, and you have to stop them. Finally, if this shopping list of options wasn't enough, you also get to pick all the monsters that you'll be fighting, which is bizarre, because I don't exactly remember Frodo saying, actually, if we could not have any trolls in this adventure, that would be really nice. I don't mean to generalize, but trolls, they talk about NFTs a lot, and it's not really a topic anyone cares about, you know what I mean? And then you are ready to go and input all of that into the companion app! Hello! Return to Dark Tower is an app-based game. Here is my opinion on app-based games. They're fine, there's nothing wrong with them. But ever since their debut all the way back in 2014, that's 8 years ago, a certain portion of the board game loving hobby has decided to take on a purist mandate to be very weird about it. Any video made about any board game that has a mandatory companion app will inevitably include comments like, what if my app runs out of battery? Or, what if app not work? Or, what if in 70 years time my great-grandchildren want to play an old game I bought in 2022? They won't. You yourself have already forgotten about the game you just bought 2 weeks ago. Come off of it. Also, the way the world is going, in 70 years time there won't even be grandchildren, much less apps, there are other hills to go die on, pick a better fight. Anyway, we've all heard these regurgitated speaking points that don't make any sense if you spend longer than 2 seconds thinking about them. And no one's making you like board games with apps, just don't leave that comment, okay? Stop typing that the game won't work if the app stops working. Stop that. Stop it right now. Back to the game. You've got your characters, you've got your boss, you've got your monsters. What next? The answer is obvious. It's skulls, everybody. It's skulls. Alas, poor Yorick, you had a tiny head. And now I will drop the carcass of your tiny head into a big plastic toy, and it will be fun. Basically, in the land of the Dark Tower, there's a skull problem. And your job as a hero is to go about the land, picking up skulls and putting them in your knapsack. You start the game collectively with 24 skulls. And on your turn, you get to wander around, kill monsters, go into dungeons, complete quests, buy gear or treasure, but also collect skulls. And then every time your turn ends, you get to drop the skullet in the gullet.
By the power of Grayskull!
Get it? Because the skulls are grey? That's not gonna get old when your friend says the line every time they drop the skull. Anywho, if you ever run out of skulls, that's it, you've lost, because the Nazgul eggs have hatched. Don't ask me how that works. How do you get the skullet out of the gullet? Well, actually, you don't. Remember me mentioning the tower having a mind of its own? Each time you drop a skull to end your turn, which, let me just add, is an immensely satisfying and clever way to end a player's turn, you also activate its innards. You rouse it from its slumber. Sometimes it'll just go back to sleep. Other times a seal will be broken, meaning you'll have to physically remove one of the tower's doors. There might be just a hole behind it, or there might be a glyph, and if it's facing you, then you'll get a penalty. Or an event might happen, like the villain stripping you of loot, or a companion you recruited earlier might miraculously offer you aid that was very, very needed. And finally, through these holes, the tower might literally spit those same skulls right back onto the kingdom. Once it does, any skulls that fell into your kingdom, meaning your side of the board, you'll have to place onto buildings that you possess. Anytime when a building has more than 3 skulls, it gets destroyed. If you're thinking Skulldemic, you're on the right track. This is the crux of your turn. There are so many interesting things to do. You could find monsters, you could go to the bazaar to get some cool treasure, or you could take one for the team and spend your turn cleaning up skulls. Actually, I'm doing the game a disservice here. Your turn is never quite as boring as having to tidy up your room. You in fact have 2 different groups of actions you can do. The first group is either fight a monster, quest, or the aforementioned skull cleaning. The second group revolves around the 4 buildings that you can visit, and there you can do the reinforce action, which depends on the building you are visiting. So for example, doing that on its own, I'm not making it do that. You could get some gear or treasure. You could upgrade your character, giving them a new ability. You could heal a nasty corruption, or you could get some warriors, which is this game's version of hit points. Best bit, you can do each of those actions in between any of your movement, meaning you can always come up with something more interesting than, I guess I'm just gonna spend my turn cleaning 2 skulls again. If it's okay, I would like to talk about these 3 things in more depth. No, I'm asking you, it's not like you can stop me. Oh, you wanna stop me? All right, let's see how many advantages you got. So, fighting monsters in this game is kinda cool, and it all happens in the app. Also, it's a bit like drawing tarot cards, and also a bit like blackjack. Anytime you fight a monster, you'll pick the type of monster in the app. Then the app will deal you a tableau of cards, and you have to survive a number of them based on how scary the monster is. Once you've selected the cards, the app will flip the first one for you, and it'll tell you to lose things. In this case, it's telling you to lose warriors, but it might make you lose other things like spirit, which is this game's currency, or gear, or treasure. It might even make you drop skulls in the tower. As long as you're able to complete that, you just press confirm and flip the next card, and then you complete that, and then if you're able to do that, you press confirm and then you flip the next card, and if you go through all of them, you win. Thing is, there is no tangible reward for winning the fight. So that's about as much fun as buying a bouncy castle purely for decoration purposes. There's no XP or loot or even a well done, you flipped a card and lived to tell a tale, here's a medal. But there are advantages. Advantages are basically your stats. There's magic advantages, humanoid advantages, undead advantages, and so on. Let's say you're fighting a bagel monster. Well, it's susceptible to bagel advantages. At the start of the fight, you will calculate how many bagel advantages you have, and that's your tally. And then when you flip a card, you can spend advantages to make it better, better, better. Wow, now it's actually giving me something instead of taking it away. And that's your reward basically. Spend your bagels wisely and you'll come away from a fight with more than you had when you entered it. Except there's no wisdom. You're just flipping cards and pressing the button and maybe the casino pays out. Is it crunchy? No, but neither are bagels. Is it fun? Well, I'm wearing this one on my finger, and that's at least entertaining. Then there's treasure. I won't dwell on this long, it's just cards that give you abilities. I just wanted to mention that these are really good. I've played so many dungeon crawlers where the items you get are kinda bung, and these are not. A lot of the time they give you advantages plus a cool ability. So anytime you get a treasure, it feels like a double whammy of awesome. Like, here's a bonus, oh, and also you get to do this totally broken thing now, which feels really nice. I wish more games had items that felt powerful but didn't make the game more boring because the strategies become rote. It's a tough thing to balance, and I think Return to Dark Tower lands this particular element perfectly. And finally, questing, which is also a double whammy because it's two entirely separate whammies under one wham. One side of questing is going into dungeons, a sort of spin on fighting where you go from room to room in a randomly generated mini-maze until you find the exit. This uses the same advantage mechanism as fights. Go into a room, bad. Spend an advantage, good. Find exit, you won. Your prize? Not having to do this anymore because the writing is poor, the dungeons feel procedural in the worst way, and the whole thing stinks of regurgitated design. Not a fan of this wham. The other wham is the actual quests, which can be seasonal quests or the main quests. Your game of Return to Dark Tower will be split into 6 months or rounds. Each month, apart from the first one, you get 2 seasonal quests. One of them says, complete me or bad things will happen. The other one says, complete me and good things will happen. Either way, you need to collect tchotchkes to spend on the quest, a slew of warriors or maybe some gear. And this is enough of a distraction to actually distract you from doing things needed for survival, like collecting skulls or killing monsters. Completing quests is good, or so you think, because the rewards aren't always tangible. You might be told what you'll get, like a companion that, much like treasure, will provide you with a really neat ability, but also they might just do things that the app deems on its own. And that's hard to quantify. Same for the quests that punish you if you don't complete them. You might get a hint at what will happen, but you won't know what the damage is until it's done. I like this. It makes Dark Tower less mechanical, less procedural, and more mysterious, but not to the point where it's annoying. After all, make it predictable and it's just a cheap plastic toy. Instead, it introduces real stakes. Maybe there's just 5 skulls left in your knapsack. Are you gonna complete the quest instead of clearing some skulls and risk losing the game? 5 skulls might be enough, maybe. Or you're gonna ignore the quest, and then who knows what happens. Finally, there's the main quest, something that you will spend many months doing. Our first adventure asked us to collect 4 treasures of a specific type. Our second wanted us to amass an absurd amount of warriors. Once you complete the main quest, you will unlock access to fighting the adversary, the final whammy. Defeat the adversary, and you win. You can say that we're more jaded in 2022, but I'd argue that the world has just moved on. Maybe the old tower was really neat in 1981, but we tell better stories now, and frankly, we have better toys. I know that half of this game is directly catering to nostalgia, but honestly, I haven't got a lot of nostalgia for nostalgia. I need this to be the best game that it can be, not just a toy for the old boys, and in some ways, it is. It's simultaneously that same dorky tower with so many new bells and whistles that are not exactly surprising, yet still manage to be entertaining, but it's also actually a game that's fun in a showy kind of way. Return to Dark Tower is not crunchy enough to completely wow me, but it's silly and bombastic enough to ask my friends if they want to spend an evening having a Toys R Us shelf item spit tiny skulls at us for 2 hours and not feel completely stupid. Except there's just one problem. You know how they say you can't put a price on childhood? Well, it turns out you can. And that price is £189.99 recommended retail. So you want me, effectively a child, to take a ring into an active volcano 2,000 miles away, past armies of murder goblins, and with Sean Bean in my party?
Yes, and you can pay my consultancy fee in 6 easy installments.
Ha! $189.99 for this. Look, I get that this was work. I get that this is big, intricate, with rooms spinning inside and lights and things and the app. I get it. But it's still $189.99 for this. Just no. The more I looked at it with that price in mind, the more it felt like a pound shop toy shelf reject. It's just so much money for something that is clearly less return on your investment than almost any other game in the genre with that price tag. You could buy Gloomhaven, you could buy the new Descent, so many games actually cheaper than this. And then, one trip to eBay later, I figured it out. Turns out the original Dark Tower fetches an even more demanding £200 price tag on the secondary market. And when you factor in the fact that online board game shops frequently introduce heavy discounts to recommended retail, then this becomes a bargain. And look, I don't want to judge you. If you want the Dark Tower back in your life, if this is nostalgia for you and you just want it, then well, this is better and cheaper. It's a total slam dunk. It pains me to land on this recommendation because there's a lot of connective tissue here to reinvigorate this idea of an evil narrator sticking mud in your shoes. Maybe you don't have nostalgia for the Dark Tower specifically, but you might remember playing Atmosphere or some such as a kid. Wouldn't it be great if this was the game that brings that whole genre back to the table? But with a price tag like that, Return to Dark Tower becomes a much wider field for criticism. I need this thing to be rock solid, and it is at best custard solid. First, the obvious. Maybe the reason that they never made games with giant towers again is because when I play board games with friends, I like to see my friends. And failing that, at least the other side of the board. Instead, I have this, what's the word for this shape? Obelisk. This giant obelisk sit between me and 2/3 of everything. Not good. Then there's the fights, which remember, I liked, and that's still true. But I really dislike how the monsters are integrated as a threat, because they just sit there on the map and you can get rid of them or not. What do they do? Who knows? Like, I've played the game enough to know what the consequences are, because in reality what happens is that if you leave them alone, then the app will eventually make them do something. Maybe. I've had games where monsters had no real tangible impact. And this isn't so much a problem with mechanisms, but rather how mechanisms are telegraphed to the game's players. I know this is true because there's multiple threads on BGG where people are just going, so what do the monsters even do? So you've got a cool mechanism that you don't know why you're engaging with because the benefits aren't clear until you've played the game enough. And adversaries are an even bigger misunderstanding. The combat mechanism is great for fighting minions, but terrible in a boss fight. There's no stakes, no sense of danger. You just need to come at it with more stuff. Worse yet, the corruption mechanism. If fighting anything or dungeoning or just doing whatever, you're told to pay something but you can't, you have to take a corruption. These impose penalties, but the scary part is that if you ever get free, you lose the game. Meaning that on the last boss fight, only 3 of the 5 cards are dangerous if you come at it with no corruption. The other 2 you can just safely ignore by saying, whatever, we take 1 corruption and then move on. Some adversaries will attack all players, but even then it's a matter of preparation rather than the actual fight. And since corruption won't have any effects afterwards because the game will end, you can ignore a portion of the boss fight as inconsequential. That's terrible. Icing on the cake, what happens when you win? These villains are so bargain basement, it makes me want to give Jeremy Irons an Oscar for his performance in the D&D movie. There's just no story in this game. And I get that this is a board game, but when you win, you get the same boilerplate winning text. Like, congrats, the Dark Tower sleeps for now, dun dun dun. Please give me something, anything else. It's like this game was made with acute awareness that whoever buys it is gonna play it once and then leave it to gather dust on the shelf. It's anticlimactic in the worst way, in the way that feels lazy, and that's disappointing. Which is where you say, there's an expansion, yay! This should make my job easy. That is too expensive. Surely paying more isn't gonna save it. Right? Oh, the Alliance's expansion for Return to Dark Tower, I regret to announce, was an experience I had a genuine blast playing.
Ships.
It's still Pandemic plus. The bosses are still just very naff whimpers. There's still the same boilerplate, you won, yay, but did you end screen? But something about this just makes it a tighter, crunchier experience that walks that tightrope of anticipating threats and putting out fires in a way I really enjoyed. Also, when I played with Alliances, the presence of monsters was a lot more tangible. They just did more things, and I don't know whether that's because I've added in the expansion, or I just chose a better scenario or a better set of monsters, or whether that's something they just updated in between my plays into the app. Some of Return to Dark Tower will always remain a mystery, guarded in the gubbins of code, and that is part of its charm, but also makes it kind of hard to review. There's also different kinds of skulls now. These are called power skulls, so now you can say things like, by the power of Lime Skull, when you drop them in the tower, and they have different nasty effects. Add to that guilds you need to please, so that's another thing you need to baby. There's an extra monthly quest, and even 2 new characters. Everything feels dialed up to 13. There's so many more threats, so many more things to take care of, so many, there just isn't enough time to do everything. Started getting the sense that this was the way the game was always meant to be. But I also started to understand the split. This is for when you want to show the tower to your friends to have a dorky time, and this is for when you want the crunch. It all kind of makes sense. So here's my verdict. I'm not gonna tell you how to spend your money. If you've got that many dollary dues and you really want this, you're not gonna come away from it disappointed much. But if you want like a really solid 10 out of 10, sorry, this review ran out of batteries. If you want to watch the end of it, hit the subscribe button and that's going to recharge our batteries. And then when you do that, it'll automatically just put you towards the end of that review. If you really want to make sure that that actually works, there's patreon.com/no-pun-included. And that's where you give us money because we review board games. And that's not really a job unless people give us money. Big thank you to everyone who already does. And that's it. Thank you. Goodbye.